Of course, I would like first to thank the organizers because we have a strong partnership with UEFA, the Council of Europe with UEFA. And the Euro 2012 is an opportunity for the Council of Europe and the department in charge of sport to have very specific and concrete activities in the frame of this very important competition when it comes to training. And I will come back to it a bit later. Actually, I told Joyce a few minutes ago before the lunch break that I did my homework because basically what I was asked to do is to give you a wider picture because we are here, we discussed about the Euro 2012, the events in Poland and in Ukraine, and representing the Council of Europe here, I am asked to put it into a more European perspective from a sport policies point of view, from a legal point of view. And she asked me actually to go and look for data and statistics. Although I'm working in the Department of Sport, I did my homework and I actually asked my colleagues from the division that deal with the social inclusion of people with disabilities to give me some facts and figures, and I would like to report on them to you. And I have to say that it broke my heart when I read those statistics, because I realized that the situation is really bad. Although and this is something I would like to stress, for the Council of Europe, maybe I should also explain that the Council of Europe is a sister organization of the European Union. It is composed of 47 member states, basically the geographical scope of UEFA, which I think is very relevant and very interesting. Ukraine, for instance, is a member of the Council of Europe, as many countries of the Balkans and the Caucasus. What is important to stress is that when we speak about people with disabilities, we speak about citizens, we speak about any citizen of any country with the very same rights as the other part of the population. If you have questions on how the Council of Europe is dealing with this principle, I will be happy to answer those questions. But let me go back to the statistics. Actually, according to the information I have, and I'm going to read it, 38% of disabled people aged from 16 to 34 across Europe have an earned income compared to 64% of able-bodied people. So basically the half of the population. Another statistics. In Europe, 47.8% of all people with disabilities participate in the labor force compared with 71.8% of people without disabilities. I am not going to speak about the unemployment rate. You can imagine that it's much higher for people with disabilities. And it's actually within this group, because what do we talk about when we speak about disability? We can see here in this room, there are many kinds of disability. It's a very diverse population, like the rest of the society, by the way. So it's very difficult when targeting. I know we need to put some etiquette to give some, to put someone in a box. So we say disabled. But as a matter of fact, we can't do like this because it's just impossible to treat everybody the very same way because obviously the persons are different. And the most dramatic, as far as I could read from the statistics, the most dramatic situation is regarding the participation to leisure, sports, cultural activities. Because basically, 1 out of 2, so half of the people with disabilities do not have access to this cultural life, this sports life, this leisure, touristic, traveling abroad, going on an excursion, attending match. And this is the situation is very, I was really surprised when I read that in Europe we have still these figures. and it's really a shame, I have to say. What has been the response of the Council of Europe? Because this organization is a human rights organization, basically. So there are a certain number of conventions, recommendations, and the policies regarding people with disabilities dates from decades now. Here you have the very last action plan drafted by the Committee of Ministers and endorsed by the Committee of Ministers. But as a matter of fact, the Council of Europe has been dealing with the social inclusion of people with disabilities for decades. And if I just want to say that because, for instance, there's a very important convention, the Convention on Human Rights. You might have heard about it. But there's another convention, the Convention of Social Rights. And there's a very specific provision saying that people with disabilities have the very same social and cultural rights as the other part of the population. And we had to wait, actually. Now the situation is a bit better from a political perspective, because in this action plan, there was a shift. Beforehand, despite this very important convention, and despite the fact that in the text itself, it was written that basically people with disabilities were full citizens with full rights, the mentality, the political willingness, the political mind was not there. And there was you know that better than me because I'm really not a specialist in this field and area, but there was a tendency to look at a person with disability as a patient, to have this medical approach, to see the person with a disability as not as a contributing citizen of the state, which obviously was not in line with what was written in the text. And now, what is positive is that with this disability action plan, member states of the Council of Europe, including Poland, including Ukraine, including all of them, there was a shift. Now, the persons with disabilities are seen as citizens. And there are two main of course, citizenship is one of the elements, but there's another one which is autonomy. And therefore, now it's not as if the problem would lie in the person itself, but the problem is in the society that still have barriers for a full enjoyment of rights of people with disabilities. And this is very important. And when I read this statistic about 1 out of 2 not going out, suffering from isolation, it really broke my heart, and I thought, wow, we need to do something. If we look at this action plan, I mean, the Council of Europe usually it does norms, conventions, so it's a legal organization. But the important thing, and this is something I want to stress here, this is a recommendation. What does it mean? It means that you as citizens, you as member of NGOs, you as a member of clubs or FAs or whatever, you can go to your state authorities and say, listen, how come the situation is still so bad? You committed yourself in a European organization to do something to change the situation. It's written black on white. So the recommendation as such, and this action plan, it's not a convention. You couldn't go, for instance, to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg and say, well, I've been discriminated against, so this is not the same, it has not the same value, but it's a political and moral commitment of the states. So please, use it. Use it in your daily life, use it to your authorities, because if you go into the substance of this disability action plan, you will see that there are measures that the Committee of Ministers recommend the states to take. And very precise in terms of accessibility, obviously. This is the very first thing that can come to your mind. But there's also, in education, for instance, there's a reference to the need at school, in the education curricula for children with disabilities, to have access to sports and culture as part of the curricula. So I'm not going to enter into the detail, just to let you know that the, let me see, I think this is action line number 2. I don't find it now, but I think it's action line number 2, participation to cultural life. And then if you want, you can find it and download it. This is an easy to read version, because you can imagine those are legal text, and it's a bit boring, and it's much easier to go into this kind of text. In the Council of Europe, the approach is manifold, of course, but the important thing to know is that obviously dealing with the social inclusion of people with disabilities is a transversal one. So I have colleagues dealing with this action plan and with activities related to the daily life, basically, of citizens with disabilities. From my side, I'm working in the sport department, and there are also a certain number of texts in which there is a reference to the main focus will be on the practice of sport by people with disabilities and adapted sport. But I understand that in this context, in this room today, I'm not going to speak about adapted sport because this is not the place. But if you are interested, we can discuss afterwards about it. The importance of my statement today, of my speech, is rather to see what is the values of sport. Why do we choose sport as a vector to promote the social inclusion? As I said at the beginning, 1 out of 2 people with disabilities suffer from isolation. Sport is a unique place. Be you an observer or an actor where you can share. You experience, we experience, because myself, I'm included in this, we experience togetherness, we communicate, we share experience. And this is a fabulous tool. And I'm glad, actually, that for the Euro 2012, we used those big events as well to raise awareness not only from the mainstream population, because there is something I would like to stress as well. I've been in conferences and meetings, and I've realized that within the category of disabled people, there are divisions. And there are several categories, and there are subgroups in the world of people with disabilities. And some are more marginalized. There are multiple layers of discrimination. If you are a woman, for instance, you have a greater probability to be more discriminated as a woman and as a disabled person. And it was interesting because last week, actually, I was here in another conference we organized on women and sport. And in the workshop on, I think the title was Disability from Playground to Podium. So it was a wide spectrum. When we spoke about, it's a conference about women in sport. Actually, we spoke about disability, full stop, and not about women. And there was one woman, she said, during the workshop, she said, but what you talk about concerns mostly men. And this is not, I mean, we have we face another difficulties or other problems, and I'm not concerned about it. Of course I'm concerned as a person with disability, but I'm a woman. And my situation is pretty different from the situation of a man with a disability. My point here is to say that we can always recreate subgroups because we are belonging to a minority, whatever the minority is. And it always struck me because even when you can be the target of a discrimination or suffer from a discrimination, you can reproduce it as well. And this is something which is always very striking to me. what I want to stress is that in the Council of Europe, we have this transversal approach, which is connected. I'm working hand in hand with my colleagues from the Social Inclusion Directorate. And the approach followed is an inclusive approach. And this is something I want to stress now, because the idea is really to have one society, a diverse society, and that everybody fits okay in this society, and that the society provides all the, of course, the facilities for everyone to be a full citizen. This is not about having a segregation as such. Of course, if segregation is needed, and I remember in a conference in Spain about, well, it was adapted sport, the practice of sport. In that case, it was needed to have a separate practice, or separate bodies or federations to compete and for training, etc. And of course, the Council of Europe won't say anything about it because, well, first, there is the principle of autonomy of the sport movement, but also because at the end of the day, this is the objective which is important. The objective is that, as I said, we are all citizens, we are all athletes, or at least we like to practice sport, and this is what counts. The way to reach it is another subject, but it's better to at least try something. And in some cases, in some countries, there's a great debate about the ways to do it, about the policies to adopt, about how to go for it, because there are principles, philosophies, which go exactly in the opposite direction. And actually, this is not important. I'm a pragmatic woman, this is the result. This is clearly not the way to go, of course. The better it is, the best, so to say. But it's really the result that matters. And we need to go and to continue, because it's, I have the feeling when I read those statistics that, I mean, we talk about the Council of Europe, there are 47 member states. If we take the average of 10% of the population, let's keep this average, which is low, I think. It could be a bit higher. There are 800,000, no, 800,000, yeah, Europeans. So it would be 80 millions. Am I correct? Yeah, no, 80,000. No, 80 millions. Now I'm a bit lost with I'm not an active speaker, so it's a bit complicated. But anyway, it's a large part of the population. It's more than 10%. So when people look at me and when we discuss with either politicians, whoever, and they say, oh, but it's marginal. Okay, this is, you know, it's a small part of the population. I say, what? What are you talking about? We speak about millions of people. And for you, it's marginal? It's like, no, it's not marginal. And I have to say that when you look at the text of the Council of Europe, from the 60s, from the 70s, people with disabilities have always been considered as an enriching and contributing factor of the society, and not the other way around. And I think we need to go back to these basics. Now there is a movement, and I'm really glad. I don't think I have too much time to continue speaking, but I'm really glad that the Council of Europe is part of this 2012 social project. This is something within the enlarged partial agreement on sport that I represent today. We have been dealing with a certain number of activities, but we know that having a norm, a text, like a convention, recommendation, is not sufficient. Because we speak about changing mentalities, we mean a change of culture, and it requires power, energy. We need to fight. It's a struggle, and an everyday struggle, but for a better future. So I was very impressed by the presentation. Although I arrived late this morning, I was very impressed by the presentation made by our colleagues from Ukraine and Poland, and I'm really glad that the Council of Europe is associated to those projects, because The visibility of those events are such that it's very important that the political message I'm carrying here is also delivered through different means. And I think that sport as a universal language is really fantastic for that. And I would like to thank you again for having accepted to involve us in this very nice project. Thank you very much.